Value Match is a consultancy and shared service company, so we support customers who are buying procurement services from us, and also we support suppliers when they're bidding into the public sector or large private sector organisations. So it's basically services based, and the customers are all over the country, quite geographically widespread, and we're growing quite rapidly as well. I'm the CEO, so I guess I'm responsible for most of the organisation trying to work effectively, but obviously the functions such as finance, HR, as well as core operations, ultimately my responsibility to make sure they all work effectively. Our finance operations are really small. We're still, although we're growing, we're still 20 people or so. And previously, we had a number of larger relationships with customers. And so our finance system was originally Sage Line 50. It was, it must be 10 years old. It was very decrepit, very simple, basically on a laptop. And as we've developed the shared services, very rapidly, the organisation was becoming a lot more complicated really quickly. So billing potentially thousands of different customers. So we needed to significantly change the way we were operating. And also from a application point of view, we just needed to upgrade the Sage Line 50 to a sort of more cloud-based solution, and something that was going to be more secure as well. Some real practical ones. We definitely wanted a cloud-based solution because we obviously want to be sensibly protected from a sort of application and from a sort of cybercrime perspective, so it needed to be secure. We've always used Sage products, and obviously Sage is SME orientated. It's UK-based company. A large part of our customer base is in the Northeast as well, so there's a sort of linking connection there. So we were quite happy to stay with the Sage suite of products. We had some choices of whether we go Sage 200, Sage 100, but we felt that we wanted to move to something that we could grow into, rather than maybe take a lower level sort of application and then re-implement in 2 or 3 years' time. We wanted just to grow with a particular product set. So cloud-based solution, and although we're quite small, we've got relatively complicated reporting mechanisms. So we wanted to also make sure we had strong sort of out-of-the-box reporting. That's a really interesting question. Looking for a partner, I think, is quite challenging when you're a small company, because you first of all want to make sure that someone is totally accredited and focused, understand the applications and the software that you're about to use. We needed someone who wanted to be responsive, because we're never going to be the biggest customer. So someone who's going to sort of take our account seriously and support us. We only have one finance person, and we knew that they would need quite a lot of support. So first of all, accreditation on the Sage products was quite important. We originally started to look in the Northeast region, which is where the finance manager lives, because we're all remote. But we didn't really find the right type of organisation. So we also spoke to Sage to see if there was organisations they would recommend. And, our sort of due diligence and research ultimately brought us to itas. Sage Intacct, its impact on the business has been quite significant, really, because previously we did all of our sort of accounting, all of our reporting was done in Excel. So basically we were exporting everything into an Excel spreadsheet. I think our finance processes were pretty rudimentary, and sort of the disciplines of Sage Intacct have led us to be a little bit more robust in terms of the data entries and journals and accruals and sort of reversing transactions, which gives us a proper audit trail, whereas previously, frankly, a transaction could just be amended and there wouldn't be an audit trail. The out-of-the-box reporting is really super helpful, but also we had some really good support from itas, who helped build some bespoke reports that we needed. As I say, we've got some level of complexity in the business, and we want to track revenue to costs on specific service lines. So all of that is being developed. So now the month-end process is a lot more straightforward. All the reporting is pretty much automated, so that again makes a big difference. And when you're such a small team, having as much automated as possible does make a really big impact and releases resource. The month-end processing has enabled us to be far more rigorous in the way we manage the day-by-day activity of accounting. So we have audit trails on every change that we make, which is important. We are also then enabling that information to be linked to other systems as well, which is helpful in terms of CRM system. So we are able to use that data in a slightly different way, in a more standardized, more rigorous way as well. The monthly reporting is really quick. So by the time, once we've closed all the journals and the sort of customer and supplier accounts, it's pretty much a press of a button at the end of the month. So all of that automatically gets populated, and then that sort of is presented in PDF or Excel format. That all happens, within a couple of hours of the month closing, so a lot quicker. It was a little bit more hit and miss in terms of reporting. Previously, we would have maybe 2 or 3 days occasionally delay because there was manual processing involved, and then if someone's busy or they've got other priorities, then all of a sudden there could be a couple of days delay. So it's a lot more consistent, which for me is really important. Because a lot of our management's information also gets reported to key customers. So if we're delayed in the month-end close or reporting, then that's also going to delay our ability to manage customers and interface with those customers as well. We haven't put any numbers around time saved. It is one person. So we're, in one sense, we're not releasing new resource, if you like, or replacing anyone. What we're doing is just optimizing the finance manager's time so they can be focused on more value-added work. So it's really just about enabling ourselves to grow with a level of complexity in the way we're operating, and just more customers, more spend, more transactions, and doing them more efficiently without additional heads. So it's definitely more efficient, and it's enabled us to just keep growing without taking additional headcount on. My favorite feature or capability. Well, I'm just going to focus on reporting because that's what I see and that's what I like and that's what drives me. Because I chatted to Helen before recording this. I think what she likes about it is the structure and the flexibility within Sage Intacct as a sort of finance operating model. And the consistency of operating. So once you get used to inputting data, once you get used to, in our case, reversing journals and so on and so forth, the consistency of the interface, the user interface is really quite useful and intuitive. So I think the overall usability of the application, I think, is really beneficial. Certainly compared to older packages as well that we had previously. So just a lot more flexibility, I think, in general. The transition was the transition between us, obviously a really old Sage package and Intacct, was quite significant, and actually we wouldn't have been able to do that without the support of itas and the team in itas as well. So we were really well supported. I think we would have struggled to have moved without support, and that was important for us. Just the structure of the implementation was really important, because it also enabled us to ask ourselves, prompted by the team, why do you need these reports? What's your working processes? What's your month-end processes? Because it does sort of force us to work in a slightly more, I would say, more professional and rigorous way in terms of how you manage the sort of month-end processes and closure. So overall, I think it's quite a big change from where we were, but the change itself really wasn't that problematic in the end. So quite a big change, but not particularly a problem. The implementation process was quite rigorous and well managed. I think there's itas, you have a very structured plan around migration from different systems, I believe. So there is weekly meetings. We have the input in terms of developing the requirements, what are testing and validating and confirming the requirements that we had. There was quite a lot of detail, lots of documentation to complete, standardized data capture in terms of templates. So it was really well structured. We had decided in part to move now before we had too many transactions and suppliers. So we deliberately probably went slightly earlier than we needed to, because as we had more and more transactions, suppliers and customers, that would have been more difficult to migrate. So the whole process really structured, very well disciplined. The team were happy for us to ask really dumb questions and answer them, and we asked quite a lot of dumb questions, to be fair. We answered those questions, but also enabled us to do things like some data cleansing that we needed to do, or where there's missing data, because always the risk of any implementation in software is you have a lot more functionality, but quite often you will have missing data sets that you can go and prepare before implementation to get to input that data before the move. So very structured, really disciplined, which helped us, but not overbearing as well. So meetings were set up, but if they took 15 minutes instead of half an hour, or half an hour and not an hour, that's fine. It was whenever it's completed and moved on. Very well documented as well. So yeah. The timing of moving, I think, is really important for any organization, from both when you're judging it from an affordability point of view, from a risk of implementation, from a risk of operations. And from my perspective, obviously customer service and actually delivering the operational service is the most important element of what we do. So anything I can do to de-risk the impact on that is important. We have one finance person, so it's really micro compared to other organizations I've worked in. So I think timing the change and doing that really before we needed to was beneficial in terms of it de-risked the amount of change and almost the amount of data we would have had to capture and transition. I also knew we were about to become quite a lot more complicated quite quickly. We probably got 4 or 5 times the number of customers today than we had when we implemented, and some of them are quite low value, so we needed the efficiency. So I would definitely think it's, from an operational point of view and from a management point of view, it made a great deal of sense, but also just on a pure implementation risk perspective, it makes a lot of sense as well. The number of customers that we're now managing is significantly going up, and it goes up each week really, and it's a function of the way we're operating and the service we're delivering. So in terms of our types of projects, we're managing procurement projects are not roughly, 199 projects to be exact so far, and they're ramping up month on month, and there's about 145 million pounds worth of project delivery. And that's happened over the last 2 years. So that basically means there's a far greater amount of just transactional activity that needs to be managed. So we obviously need to standardize and make that as efficient as possible. We've been able to standardize the templates and just move producing invoices more efficiently and effectively. We can where we've got standardized monthly invoicing, that can be automated. So it's just about those transactional automations, standardizing the template, standardizing the approach, having clarity on particular sign-off processes. The way we've set up, I think the accounting structure has also supported that. So we took quite a lot of time in getting our sort of nominal structures correct and standardized ahead of time. And again, there was a lot of support from the itas team on that. I mean, we had some quirky things that we wanted to do in terms of tracking different service lines to potentially the same customer. Just some of those practical things. I'm not a financial expert, but we were helped to set those up, which mean there's really very minimal manual intervention, really, which has enabled us to keep that headcount quite tight. So we went back to first principles because there was no point in looking at our existing reporting in the sense of it was very limited. And also it didn't take into account the complexity that I wanted to capture, because we're basically introducing 3 new service lines, and within those service lines there was 4 or 5 revenue data points that I wanted to track separately. So super simply, we've got 4 major revenue lines, but within each of those lines, there's maybe 3 or 4 subsets of revenue data that we need to map. But I also want to map that to direct costs. And again, this is more for future growth than, do I strictly need that today? Well, not really, because we could probably manually just work through those reports. But with the growth, we could very quickly lose sight of the direct cost allocated against each individual revenue line. So it was about setting those up in advance, thinking about the requirements and working through that with the itas team around what are we strategically trying to measure? Why are we trying to measure those revenues to costs? And then to capture it in the way we're structured from a management point of view. So it was just bringing all that together to enable us to be very clear on which areas are profitable, which areas are not profitable. And again, we've standardized a couple of those reports so they're automated, so we can see ratios coming out of direct costs to revenue. And again, that's a standard report that just gets automated at the end of each month. So it gives almost like a snapshot of which lines are more profitable than others and why. In terms of statistical reporting, we're looking at ratios across those lines of business. That's really important for us, because fundamentally, there's almost 2 layers of revenue. There's revenue associated with basically just people and service, so almost like a consultancy-based organization, but then there's also revenue associated with the ongoing delivery of projects, which may become disassociated with just people-based resource. And we need to track both, and that's the sort of the rationale behind having those different sorts of revenue and cost lines, and then analysing in month the relevant ratios and also year to date, so we can start to see improvements in the way we operate, and also whether the investment's in the right place and getting the expected outcomes. So itas supported in the structured reporting because the consultants supporting us know the system really well. So we were able to articulate the business need What we wouldn't have been able to do is say, is it a standard out of the box report? Is it a 60% standard report with some additional functionality that needs to be built in? We just wouldn't have been able to do that. There's 300-400 standard reports at least. We just wouldn't have been able to short circuit that process. So we were able to say, this is our fundamental, this is the ask, this is a key data point we really do need to see. But even in the way we want to see it, so personally, I always want to see a 12-month profile. I don't like to just see 1 month in isolation. I always want to see the context, and I also want to see ratios and trends. And the consultants were able to identify which areas are fairly standard reporting. You'd sort of expect the P&L and the balance sheet, but that ratio analysis where they help pull that together and then use some sort of visual indicators over whether it's overperforming or underperforming. So we probably could have found it eventually, but it could have taken forever. And so that came as part of the implementation. So I think we ran the first month with the existing system. So we ran the two finance systems in parallel. By the time we got to the second month, all of the suite of reporting was pretty much done, and we road tested it over the following 2 months and made a couple of minor tweaks and additions. So that was sort of like the process. itas supported the project management. They actually ran the project. So what was super helpful for us was all the project disciplines were all built into the implementation plan, and the sequencing of the plan. Now that wasn't, and that was rigid enough to give you confidence that you're going to cover all the issues. And I guess the learning from itas implementing this in lots of different companies, including really small companies like ourselves. So there was enough rigor, but there was also enough flexibility. So from an operational point of view, which I know our finance manager really appreciated, was if we had a busy period or it was in month end, then we might move that task by a week or a couple of weeks to enable us to carry on delivering, day by day financial operations. So it was pretty rigorous and rigid. But there was enough flexibility from an operational point of view to take into account those busy periods. But we quite like that rigor anyway, so we would run our own projects like that. So for us, it felt quite natural, and yeah, we want to be held to account to hit dates and deadlines, because we wanted to have the project pretty much scoped out before year end, get through year end and run in parallel for a month and then switch over. So there was a plan. I think we had about 6 months beforehand to start that process. So yeah, it was pretty straightforward, but I would say itas in effect project managed it for us. So I found that the training really interesting, because I think there was training throughout the process, not just at the end of the process. So there's an orientation around Sage Intacct, the product, the implementation, and this is my interpretation, but the implementation almost was part of the training, because as you're designing things into Sage Intacct, that's being shown. So as we're going through each of the individual modules, what does a supplier file look like? What information do you need to do? You're seeing that live in the system. So I would almost say that there's almost like informal training, familiarization might be a better way of framing it, through the process. And then there's lots of formal training, and there's lots of online training as well at staged periods within that process. So it was quite closely related to the activity you were undertaking at the time as well. Whereas sometimes I think if you have training, if it's 2 months away before you're actively using a system, you're not really practicing it. And I think it's training aligned with practice, doing some tasks. and then using the system, and then having that reinforced works much better. Well, again, the testing process, I think, starts with making sure everyone's really clear about having the right input data. Because if you don't get your data templates right, you can do all the testing in the world and it isn't going to be much use because your data is wrong to start with. So I think having a fairly rigorous process with clear data templates and data standards makes the whole testing process easier. We're quite rigorous anyway in terms of the data we have. So as I said, one of the key things is identifying where you've got gaps in that data, making sure you plug those gaps quite effectively and efficiently. And then, the good thing, I think, using Sage products anyway, and with itas's expertise of saying you can just download this information from this in this way into an Excel, also makes it easier. So there was validation of the data on the itas side as well as on our side. I think we didn't choose to move loads of legacy stuff off. We chose to finish year end and then move forward with Intacct. We didn't have, tens of thousands of lines of data. So from that point of view, I think it was probably quite an easy implementation, but we made some decisions to make it easier. Don't move a load of legacy data across if you don't need to. So I think a little bit is about being pragmatic about how you choose to implement something and not trying to, why would you want to put data into a system that's 5 years old that you're never going to look at? That's probably not very good anyway. That just doesn't make any sense. So be pragmatic would be my view on that. And I'll say it was a big difference between Sage Intacct and the system, Sage 950, the one we had before. But what we did through the process, and I think I have been involved in implementing quite a lot of systems, the first thing is de-stress everyone from it's going to be a new system. It isn't going to be perfect and it isn't going to feel comfortable, and there will be some problems day one. There will be things you won't know how to do. We will come up against things for the first time, probably for the first 3 months. So just expect that and don't worry about it too much. I think we all get a bit nervous about, if I press this button, something horrible is going to go wrong. Well, you could just phone up the help desk and get it reversed and it'll be all fine. So de-stress everyone is like number one. So I think there was a little bit of nervousness, but obviously there'd been a plan to dual run, so we were running the two systems concurrently. So that obviously we're familiar with one, so there's a little bit of fail-safe there. We didn't really want to run that more than a month. We may have gone to 6 or 7 weeks, but that was it. Again, this is partly because we're not as complicated and not as big as many organizations, so we felt comfortable doing that. We did it around year end, so we closed the year end, so we'd almost sort of cleared the previous system and sort of drew a line under that. The implementation support team were great, so they were on hand. They helped talk the finance manager through individual transactions, if there was any specific issues. And the great thing, I guess, we've all learned through COVID, sharing on screens, it's all very, you can do a lot remotely. I think it was a little bit clunkier at the year end because it just took a little bit longer to actually do actual transactions, because each one was going to be the first time I've done this transaction. But we still closed the month in the same time scale. And there was a couple of anomalies, which was the way we had processed or interpreted more about reversals of journals than anything else, or we hadn't reversed something that we should have done. So there was some real minor things. I think even down to the first VAT return, we had support on that just to make sure we did it properly, because obviously no one wants letters from HMRC. So relatively straightforward, I would say, for a finance implementation, and with a lot of support, but again, very practical shared support, which made it really, really easy. But again, we did try and de-stress on our side by just saying, don't expect it to be perfect. And, if it takes a little bit longer to do what we need to do, then that's what it does. There's a whole team of people who've been fantastic. But we had continuity from the first engagement we had with itas all the way through the implementation, and then the sort of post-implementation sort of, is everything working, are we okay? And we did make some adjustments. So we added some reports, we made some adjustments in terms of how we were doing year end, provided some really great advice on some validations we could build into the month-end process, which we weren't able to do before, which sort of supports the finance manager and just making sure that we, all the numbers are correct and balanced and so on and so forth. So there's just some very, very practical steps through there. And as I said, for the first 2 months, I would say, there was a number of occasions where we will be doing a specific type of transaction or a specific action, which we'd done for the first time. And if it wasn't obvious, we would phone and get that sort of almost hypercare that you get for the first sort of 6 to 8 weeks. And then post that again, obviously there's the customer service help desk, that's fantastic. But again, it has been really flexible, where if we've had a really very specific issue, we've just picked the phone up and said, like, can you help us out just on this one? We're not quite sure. So there's been a lot of continuity and very practical support. And I think now we are in steady state operations. So month end is working fine. I don't think we've had a great need to use customer service desk. And my guess is we'll probably try and run to the year end. There'll be a few, no doubt, issues around year end closure. I think what's next then for us will be, okay, and now we've got steady states, is how do we optimize Intacct again? Because I think the value of something like Intacct being cloud-based and developed, there'll be more opportunities to become more effective and efficient as we move forward. I can't tell you the mechanics of it. I can tell you the responsiveness. So where we've had 1 or 2 issues, our finance manager will have contacted the customer support services, and then they've been able to answer that question straight away, and it's been relatively straightforward. We've been able to resolve it that way, but very available, very responsive, and we just haven't had any issues. So it's almost by exception. No one's raised any issues with me. It's just it's all been gone reasonably well. The real-time information and data and the availability of that data enables us to validate the work that we're doing, or the financial performance, which also reinforces the operational performance. So we have an operation system in effect and a finance system. Now, they should really pretty much mirror themselves. So we run the whole organization on a working day month-end closure process, which obviously starts with finance. But from an operational point of view, we also close project delivery. We do standardized reporting that maps into the financial reporting, which is why this all needs to work in sequence. What it enables us to do is to link financial performance to operational decision making quite quickly. We can run unique reports whenever we like out of Sage Intacct, and we can do from the operational system. I think more interestingly, from a monthly and a trend point of view, it enables us to allocate resources more effectively and more accurately to need and also to performance. Or if we're investing in something, we can see that the investment, and we can see where the impact of that revenue is going to be, or we can at least forecast that out. So it just enables us to use an evidence base to confirm and justify decisions, which we're a small business, right? So you'd like to think that you know all of the moving parts, but again, I'm very conscious that as we grow, we lose sight of some of the key drivers occasionally, because as I said, we're tracking 199 projects. So all of a sudden, you're not able to keep your you can't really track that many different projects and understand the impact of each of those projects and the resource allocation to them and link it to the financial impact without data. And I'd say that's part of the reason we wanted to invest in Sage Intacct, to enable us to get that level of insight in data. And we'll probably take it a level as we get bigger. We'll go deeper because we'll have to, and then we'll be spreading that out across the operational teams as well. So we're just moving to a regional structure. So we'll be able to map the customers to regions and then provide that level of insight in terms of those customers as well to the regional management. Everyone we've met has been really super nice and responsive. My concern was we're super small, right? We're almost micro compared to some of the other accounts, but it didn't feel like that. So I think that's a massive, credit to itas and the team. That I didn't feel like we were a really small account and we didn't matter. It mattered. We got the right level of engagement. We got an appropriate and proportionate level of engagement as well, which is good. But just felt like a valued customer, really. And I think for us, it's super important, because even though we're really small, if we don't get our invoicing and finance system right, that's the whole business, right? So to make sure we feel valued and it's responsive, and it doesn't really seem to matter how big or small we were, made a big difference. And just great people and a lot of listening, because although this is a small company, most of my working career has been working in really big companies. So my requirements were more big company requirements, because I'm like, I want this information. So there was a lot of listening, and then we took a couple of attempts at getting the right level of reporting, but that worked really well. So yeah, we felt valued as a customer. And although you're not local to our finance manager is, none of that made any difference either. So the remote working's not been an issue at all, made no difference, in fact. So yeah, fantastic service. I would recommend itas as a partner to any organisation who's implementing the suite of Sage products. Yeah, our experience has been fantastic. And I think as a product, it's quite an interesting product from my perspective, because I think as a really small business, it's working for us effectively, but it's looking at the applications, the interfaces, the APIs. I know it's a product that we could grow into, and we could be 100 times bigger and still use Sage Intacct. So I know some of our customers are using Sage Intacct. We can see mid-sized and large companies using Sage Intacct. So for me, what it does is really future-proof what I'm trying to build. And I know I don't need to be worried about changing or upgrading a finance system. So for me, that's, whether it's the best product or there's a product that's 2% better, it sort of doesn't really make any difference to me. It's like, can I grow into that product, and is it going to do the things I need it to do? Because it's a cloud-based solution, because we know Sage are investing heavily in it, we know it's going to develop and move forward, and it's going to only get stronger, which is the benefit, I think, of that's why we took the decision to go straight to Intacct and not through 100 or 200 or any of the other products. So yeah, so that's what I think. It's from Sage Intacct, I can't get excited about user interfaces and all that sorts of whizzy stuff. I'm much more interested from a pure business point of view, is that a product we're able to grow with, and I don't have to worry too much about it, and I I can add applications to it and so on and so forth. And that's what it does.